Friends of ours that said they would be here, and I couldn't recognize them, which is bad.
Can we test it?
Hello. This is my big, bad, creepy voice looking up at you in the balcony. Okay.
It's good enough.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I think. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see you. Thank you for joining us here in person, for everyone who's joining us online. We are very honored to welcome Steve Gumaer and Jon Peerbolt from the NOVI organization, and this evening will be all about learning what that organization does and how we can be a part of it. And they've spent a lot of time with our church this weekend so far. They came yesterday for a youth event. They were at worship services this morning and Sunday school classes. They've really been getting to know us, and we're getting to know them. So we're very glad to have them for our annual speaker event. My name is Laura Sherwood. I'm the interim pastor here at First Presbyterian, Arlington Heights. And I won't give a long introduction. I've been getting to know them this weekend, and they really speak for themselves very well, and they have wonderful stories to share. So I just want to say that Steve and Jon, I'm really glad that I've gotten to know you and all that you're doing with NOVI, and we're very happy we can be a support, hopefully now and long into the future. If you don't know, I have spent a lot of time in Ukraine over the course of my life. Ukraine is very close to my heart and always will be. It just so happened that NOVI was on our schedule long before I had anything to do with this church. So I consider it to be a wonderful coincidence, or maybe something more. So very glad to be here with all of you tonight. And if you would bow with me, let's have a word of prayer. Loving and gracious God, we ask you to bless us this evening, all of us who have gathered in person and online, those who will watch the recording later, all those who are learning more about what life is like for children in a war zone, what life is like for children in Ukraine, and so many other places when their lives should be filled with peace. We ask you to bless the children of Ukraine in every place that is being affected by violence and war. And we ask you to bless all the adults in their lives, including us, who are looking for every way possible we can help to bring them peace. Lord, we ask you to bless this time together and all that will come from it. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Let's welcome Steve and Jon.
It's another button. This is my family. That little girl in the middle is my youngest, Kristen, and this was taken when she was 8 years old. We agreed to go on a trip to one of the refugee camps that we had worked in for about 10 years on the Burma side of the Thai-Burma border. And to get there is a pretty big adventure. It's a long drive from our home in Chiang Mai, where we lived for 20 years. And we had to take a four-wheel drive from a city. After a 4 or 5 hour drive, we had to take a four-wheel drive into the jungle, and then we got dropped off at a riverbed. And we had to walk for about 6 hours to the Moi River, which is the natural boundary between what is now called Myanmar and Thailand. Then it was called Burma. And when we got to the river, we had to wait for dark. This is us walking through the jungle. This part of Thailand was all deforested, so there would have been like 1,000-foot teak trees, but now there's just scrub. And so we're walking for about 6 hours up and down mountains to get to the Moi River, where we were going to be picked up by a long-tail boat. This isn't the boat that picked us up. This is the next day, the boat that was taking us around in the refugee camp population. But see, the refugee camp was on the Myanmar side of the border. It's not in Thailand. And to go there, there's no legal way to go there. So the reason that we had to walk through the jungle and wait for darkness is because no boats are allowed on the river after dark, but no foreigners are allowed on the river ever. So, but they cut all kinds of deals there. We've worked there for 29 years in this part of Myanmar. And the pro-democracy soldiers cut deals with the Thai guards and the Burma army, and they have this terrible war going on, but they also make deals for one another so that safe passage can be made for VIPs. We were VIPs. And so we got to the where the bank of the river started, and it's a long sandbar. It's about 3 times as long as this church aisle here. And we found a place to hide, and we sat there waiting for darkness. We sat for 3 or 4 hours after this long hike. It was really nice, me and my family, beside the Moy River. And darkness came, and we heard a boat come to the riverbank, and our guide, a soldier, said, "Okay, now it's time to go. Be quiet. Run quickly. When you get to the boat, pull the tarp over and lay down in the bow of the boat, and we'll take you up to the refugee camp." And so Kristen and I were in the lead. Elisa, Naomi, and my wife, Adni, were following. And so Kristen and I took off across the riverbank. And Kristen was upset that we were running so fast. She said, "Dad, we can't, slow down. I can't run this fast." And I said, "Honey, now's not the time to be slow. I know you can run this fast. I coach your soccer team." And she dug her heels in and said, "Dad, is this dangerous?" She looked up into my eyes and said, "Are we in danger?" And so she stopped us. I was stopped on the riverbank. And in that second, I had a whole bunch of weird feelings. So I thought, I'm the father of these beautiful kids, and I'm deliberately exposing them to increased risk and danger to visit these refugees that we work with. We had been doing it since our kids were 1 year old. We waited until they were 1 after they were born, and then we started taking them into the camps that we worked in, including the camps inside Myanmar. And so she stopped me, and I said, all I could say was, "Honey, it's going to be okay. Just trust your dad now." And we kept running. We ran. We got in the boat. She was upset. We pulled a tarp over us and laid down, and all of us laid down. And the boat began going upriver, up the Moy River. And the first bend in the river, somebody from the bank of the river shot at us with a gun, with a rifle. I was like, "No, this can't be happening." And it was only one shot, and it didn't hit the boat. It couldn't hit the boat anyhow. It was like 300 yards away, and it was a light rifle, and I knew we weren't really in physical danger, but just the fact that we were being shot from the Thai side of the border was upsetting. And knowing that we were doing something very illegal by the Thai authorities and the Myanmar authorities made me pause in my mind. But I held on. We stayed under the tarp. It took about an hour and a half when we got to Etuta refugee camp, and we got out. We met the operators of an early warning system that we set up that saved many lives, and the whole trip was worth it. It was an amazing trip. But that question my daughter asked me, "Dad, are we in danger?" stuck with me. And so I began asking myself, is what I'm doing, is what I've chosen to do with my life worth it? Is exposing my children to this alternative life and doing things like this something I should be doing? And then I thought about how we started in 1994. We went to the first refugee camp, Shoglo refugee camp. And my young wife and I sat down on the bamboo floor of Rose Moo's house. She served us tea and tin cans, and we were surrounded by poverty because these were 9,000 refugees of war who had fled to Thailand on the Thailand side. And we sat down, and for the first time, we heard about the war in Myanmar. And on our third visit to Rose, because she became a good friend of ours through these visits, there was a 3 or 4 year old little girl sleeping on the bamboo floor. And we asked Rose, who is this child? She had just been bathed. She bathed in the river that this camp was built on, and she was beautiful and had Tanaka powder swirled on her cheeks, if you've ever seen that in National Geographic. Just beautiful tribal Karen child. And she said, well, the pro-democracy soldiers from this battalion were dispatched to her village because they knew that her village was attacked by Myanmar army soldiers. They went there to document what happened for the human rights record and find survivors and help them if possible. And when they got there, they found the village destroyed and the dead people that were there. They found that people had fled off into the jungle, joining at the time, roughly 7 million internally displaced refugees. But they found one survivor, and it was this beautiful little girl. And they said that they told Rose this little girl was probably carried by her loved ones. Her village was attacked. Her loved ones knew that they would quickly be apprehended, that their lives and the life of their daughter was at risk. And it's very likely they hid that little girl in a hiding place and said, shh, don't say a word. And then they ran to distract the Burma army soldiers, and the little girl survived. And then so many days later, we don't know how long it was, but the pro-democracy good guys came and they found this little girl. When they shouted in her language, she heard them and came out of her hiding place, and they carried her for 3 or 4 days across the Moy River, through the jungle, into Thailand, to this refugee camp, to Rose. And Rose told us this story, this woman in this refugee camp, and she said, Steve, this is happening all the time in our country, and there's no lifeline for these kids. It's only the benevolence of pastors and families who take them in that they can survive. But I have capacity. I want to help these kids. Can you help me help them? And I said, well, what does it take? And we wrote down a list of all of the things this child needed for her first year in that camp. And the total cost for everything she needed for a full year was $30. And so we felt, when she said $30, my wife and I looked at ourselves and we turned to Rose and said, yes. I mean, yes, the answer is yes. Whether we have $30 now or not, the answer is yes, we can afford that. And thank you for asking us and giving us this opportunity to say yes. You know, that was 94. By 98, we had 1,200 children in 8 refugee camps that our little family friend outfit was supporting and developing and helping provide care for. Saying yes is exciting, but it's also dangerous. Fast forward to 2022, February 22, right, John? Ukraine was attacked, and our team, our organization grew from my wife and I helping one little girl to having 65 staff and a pretty cool operation helping displaced people in war zones. And we worked in Myanmar and the surrounding countries, and then we got involved in Syria and Iraq and Yemen, and wherever families were and they were unable to provide for their children, and where there was active conflict and large aid agencies wouldn't go there, that's where we went. And so when we got a call to go to Ukraine, to go to Irpin and Bucha when it was under siege, we said yes. Because saying yes is a really great thing to do. When you get invited to something and you're pretty sure it's God inviting you, the right answer is what? Yes. It is. And it's tricky though, isn't it? Okay, so we said yes, and we got involved. We were helping people in those early days of the war who were hiding in their cellars and needing evacuation and food and so forth. But we got a call from a guy named Mike in Lviv who turned his church into an emergency stop-in center for families who are fleeing the fighting west, driving their families to Poland. But they would stop in Lviv, the western city of Lviv, and they would stay overnight, and Mike didn't know how to handle the volume and the crisis that these people were in, and he called our organization and asked if we could help. What do you say when that happens? Yes. Oh, I'm in good company here. Pastor Darrell, yes. I said yes, and my wife and I went and volunteered. Even though we were running this, at the time it was a large organization, we said yes to running this hostel. This church turned into hostel, and we ran it for a month and then hired Ukrainians and then left it to those Ukrainians. But we fell in love with Ukraine, and we saw the same kind of conflict, which you'll hear about tonight, and that we could do something for these kids. So again, we said yes. Now, the last yes story I'd like to tell you before I invite Jon is that just after that, my wife and I resigned our position from this organization we worked in for 28 years called Partners Relief and Development. We resigned because we wanted to do something different. We wanted to focus exclusively on children who are traumatized because of active conflict. We had seen for 28 years that this need was an unmet need. It was an undeveloped capacity in the NGO community. So not just the provision of food and health care and basic security and shelter, but addressing the mental health needs that they have because they're living in this constant state of trauma. And so my wife and I dreamed of the name of this new organization. We talked to people like Jon and our kids, and we came up with the name NOVI, the NOVI community. NOVI is a Latin word that simply means new. We want to bring new life to the world, new love and life to children in war zone, new potential and possibilities for kids who survive war and go into adulthood with a new possibility instead of the age-old trauma and pathologies that are attendant to it. So when we saw this possibility, what did we say? Yes. I'd like Jon to come up and talk about his yes. I'll be back.
All right. I'm so glad to be here with so many friends and family and new friends. I'm glad to be here in America, the land of 16-year-old drivers, the land of the imperial system, which, fun fact, is one of the few things we have in common with Liberia and Myanmar. Those are the only places that use the imperial system. I am 26, and I grew up in Michigan. And my whole life, I wanted to look older. You can see why. My whole life, I looked like I was 12. This was me at my 18th birthday. This is Calico. And God made me tall, which I appreciate. But he also gave me this receding hairline to keep me humble. So be careful what you ask for, I guess. There's a lot of beautiful things in the Bible about going gray, and I see a lot of crowns of glory here in the crowd tonight, actually. There's not as much in the Bible about going bald. There is one joke, though, about these kids who made fun of Elijah for being bald, and they were mauled by bears. But you don't have to worry, because my bear summoning skills are subpar at best. So, this is Steve, by the way. Hi, Steve. I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we do in Ukraine, but first I want to tell you how I got involved with NOVI. So I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and I grew up with 10 siblings. So I'm the 9th of 11. Any big families here tonight? Anything bigger than 11 kids? Okay, biggest family. So it's a blessing. I love it. I love my family. We grew up in a very conservative branch of Christianity with a very small worldview. And so the most that I knew about the problems in the world were that Asia needed more Bibles and missionaries, and that there were children starving in Africa, and so you better eat all your food and be grateful for it. I'm seeing some heads nod. Maybe some people can relate. So I grew up and spent most of my career in sales, and I stayed in my Bible Belt bubble until I met Steve, the great Bible Belt bubble burster, if you will. And he started explaining to me some of the things that were happening in Myanmar and in Syria and in Yemen and all these places that Steve was working. And I just couldn't believe it. I had no idea, and I couldn't believe that nobody had talked to me about it. And so almost immediately, he asked for my help, which who knows why, but he did. And I said yes. That's my yes. And so now I'm here telling stories about my time on the ground in Ukraine, and I'm really, really glad to be here. So if anybody here is still comfortably in their Bible Belt bubble and wants to stay there, might want to leave before we get started. All right. Allow me to take a moment to welcome any Ukrainians here tonight. Можливо, у залі є українці? Okay, clearly we didn't reach the Ukrainian community. That's all right. I wonder if anybody knows what the Ukrainian flag means. Okay, we have blue on the top, yellow on the bottom. Can any non-Ukrainian tell me what the blue symbolizes? We have a hand in the back. That's exactly right. The free blue sky and a field of wheat. And if you're driving through the Ukrainian countryside, this is what you see, and it's absolutely breathtaking. And you can really start to understand how deeply Ukrainians feel about their homeland. I want to tell you 3 stories today, which should give you an idea of what we do in Ukraine. And I'd like to start with a story about a guy named Max. Max, that's Max. Max still has all his hair, which will become surprising later in the story. He grew up in the east of Ukraine, and when the war broke out, he had the paperwork to flee to America. But at the same time, the need for volunteers to work with kids was huge, and so he was asked to stay and help his people, and he said yes. And so he immediately started planning trips to the front lines to help the children near Kherson. In this first story, I want to illustrate the need for food and community building events near the front lines. So I've spent a lot of time in these villages near Kherson and Zaporizhia and in the east. To say that living there is difficult is a severe understatement. About 90% of the population has left. And the 10% that remain are typically the 10% that are the most economically disadvantaged. So it's very austere, and about 90% of the buildings have been destroyed. So just surviving there is really, really difficult. And these children are going through a lot in these villages. And so Max wanted to help. And so he met Sasha, who's our Ukrainian team leader, he's the guy on the left, and said, I want to help the kids near the front lines. And Sasha rightly responded, you're crazy. That's dangerous. How can we help? Max needed money to pay for fuel to drive to the front, and he needed money to pay for the food that he was going to give to these kids. We obliged, but that was the easy part. Getting to these villages is the hard part, because the roads have been bombed out since day one, and I've been on these roads. It's like driving through craters of the moon. And so it takes a really long time, and it's very dangerous. Max actually got stuck in the mud a bunch of times and had to get pulled out by the military. The other danger when you're this close to the front lines is you can be targeted by artillery. The Russians stockpiled, or the Soviet Union at the time, stockpiled a lot of artillery during the Cold War, and it never got used. And so they have almost an unlimited supply. And so if you're within about 30 miles, well, really 5 miles of the front lines, then you're within range of artillery. Some of you know where I'm going with this. Max was driving to one of these villages one day, and he notices in his rearview mirror that he's being followed by a Russian surveillance drone, which might have looked like this. I got this off of Google Images. This is really bad when you're that close to the front lines, because the drones are used to help the artillery aim. And so if the drone is sending your location back to the artillery, bad news is coming. And sure enough, within a few moments, explosions start happening near the van. Pebbles from the explosions are hitting the van. And Max, surprisingly, doesn't panic. He's the only one who knows that they're the target. His team, who's in the van, doesn't know that the drone is there. And so he tries to stay calm. And somehow he has the idea to slow down and then speed up, and then slow down, and then speed up. And he drives really fast and then really slow. And what this does is it confuses the location, and so that the artillery can't hit him. So I have a question for everybody in the audience. Who here has done any work with kids? Who here has volunteered in I see some hands, a summer camp, a Sunday school? Quite a few of us. Okay, has anybody been targeted by artillery while driving to these events? No, thank you. And I feel like most of us in that situation would find other children to help. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of children who need help in safer places. And that's reasonable. And that's the problem with a lot of aid organizations, is that's how they think. And so a lot of essential aid like food and water and summer camps never make it to the places that need it the most. And so that's one of the reasons that we exist. But the end of my story is not sad, it's happy, because he did make it to the villages, and about 2 miles from the front lines in Kherson, which I think I might have a map. Yeah, that's Kherson, it's in the southeast of the country. About 2 miles from the front lines, this happened.
Дитинство йде від нас кудись, тікає швидко, бо соніш, і сліду не знайти. Та нещодавно зовсім ми були маленькими людьми і звалися дітьми. Там щирі надії, там здійснені мрії. Чекай, дитинство не зникай. Там друзів багато, там мама і тато. Чекай, дитинство не втрачай. Дитинство поряд недалеко, але несуть його лелики. Вкрай, де нас немає. Воно зникає, але ми завжди лишаємось дітьми, мрійливими дітьми. Там щирі надії, там здійснені мрії. Чекай, дитинство не зникай. Там друзів багато, там мама і тато. Чекай, дитинство не втрачай. Що сумно на душі, мрії всі свої згадай. Дитинство не втрачай. Навколо світ зміни і собі повір. Ти дитинство не втрачай. Ла-ла-ла-ла, ла-ла-ла-ла. Дитинство не втрачай. Дитинство поряд недалеко, але несуть його лелеки. Воно зникає, але ми завжди лишаємось дітьми. Дитинство не зникає.
Pretty cool, right? So we're pretty proud to be a part of this kind of work, and we're pretty proud to partner with people like Max. In my second story, I'm going to tell 3 stories, by the way. In my second story, I want to illustrate the problem of education for underprivileged children in Ukraine right now. So since the beginning of the war, over 1,300 schools have been destroyed completely, and hundreds more have been heavily damaged. And so I've actually been to a lot of these schools, and it's difficult to describe the emotions that you feel when you're walking through the rubble and you see the textbooks and you see the clothing and the arts and crafts projects twisted up in the rebar and the concrete. I took a couple of pictures, but it's hard to describe. This was a school in Chernihiv, and to give you a small idea of what it feels like, I brought this back. This is a piece of the Russian bomb that hit this school in Chernihiv that I found in the rubble. And I've cleaned it and I've washed it, and if you're not comfortable touching it, I totally understand, but if we could figure out the logistics of passing this around, that would mean a lot to me, so you can feel something from there. If you wouldn't mind passing this around. It's surprisingly heavy. So, with these schools being destroyed, a lot of people have died in those attacks, and actually in this particular attack, 19 people were killed. Is it okay if we have just a short moment of silence for the lives lost in this war? Would that be okay? Thank you. I want to introduce you to one other child. His name is Alex, and you may have read about him in our blog. Some of you have seen his picture. Alex lived in the East, and when his village was attacked, a missile hit his apartment building, and he and his mother were inside, and his mother immediately threw a mattress over top of him to protect him from the debris. And sure enough, a few minutes later, another explosion hit right outside of their apartment, and the metal dumpster that was bolted to the concrete was thrown through their glass window and landed right in their living room 3 feet from Alex. He and his mother fled, and his brother actually as well, fled to the west, and they're living in Kyiv right now. The problem that many children like Alex face is that when they flee, their family loses everything. Jobs, income, money, they leave it all behind. And so, and Alex has been in online school for 4 years because the first 2 years were COVID and then the invasion happened. But with these families who've lost everything, they really struggle to afford technology like laptops to do their school. And so many of them have dropped out of school completely, and some of them are trying to use their parents' cell phones to do school. But if anybody here has tried to write a research paper on a cell phone, you know that that's not easy. Now I want to introduce you to one other person who may not have arrived. Annie? Annie, yes, she made it. This is Annie Farrell. Would you mind standing up? Hi. Everybody say hi, Annie. Yeah. So Annie is one of your neighbors here in Chicago, and she runs a resale shop in a neighborhood just, what is it called? Rolling Meadows. You guys know where that is? Okay, great. So her resale shop is called Annie's Resale for the World, and the proceeds from this shop go to 6 nonprofits who we are lucky to be one of. And so last time we were in Chicago, we told her about this problem in Ukraine, about the education of these children and the lack of technology. And she connected us with another organization here in Chicago that refurbishes old electronics. Long story short, last time I was in Chicago, we loaded up as many as I could carry, and I carried them into the country. And one of them went to Alex's family. This is Alex getting the laptop. So let's have a round of applause for Annie, can we? This lovely lady in the NOVI shirt is Audney, that's Steve's wife, and she had her eyes closed for the photo. I couldn't get a better photo. All right, so that is the second story. In the third story, I'd like to illustrate the problem of toxic stress for children living in Ukraine right now. So, recently, we hosted an art competition, and we asked children in Ukraine, why do you want peace? And one of these contestants who submitted their art was named Lyra, and this is her. This is Lyra. So Lyra is 7. She's from a city called Kharkiv. And this is the city that Pastor Laura lived for some time and has spent a lot of time, and she actually has some adopted family in Kharkiv. This is a city in the east, and it's the second largest city in Ukraine, so it's been under heavy attack since day one. In the first few weeks of the war, her and her family hid in their basement, waiting to see what would happen. And those first few weeks were really, really terrible in Kharkiv. Lyra experienced explosions, hundreds of explosions. She experienced heavy armored personnel and tanks driving right past her window, and she, like I think any normal 7-year-old girl, was terrified. Her family noticed that she was really, really stressed and not doing well, and so for her health, they decided to evacuate to the Kyiv area. I think I might have a map here to help understand. So this is Kharkiv, and you can see how close it is to the Russian border. And this is Kyiv, where they evacuated to, which is the capital. Okay? So the drive to Kyiv was a nightmare. In those first few weeks of the war, it was a mess. There were explosions all around the car. There were buildings being blown up. And they saw dead bodies laying in the streets. It was really terrible. And so when they got to Kyiv, they checked Lyra into school. And you may notice that Lyra wears these big pink glasses, which are adorable. But we talked to her mother, and she said that before the war, she had perfect eyesight. But when they got her health checked, when they got to Kyiv, the doctor told them that she had completely lost sight in her right eye. And her mother, like I think any normal mother would ask, said, how? How did this happen? And the doctor said that it was because of the stress that she endured in those 3 weeks hiding in the basement. And that sight is unlikely to return to that eye. I want to take a second here and talk about how stress affects the body, okay? So let's say, for example, that this speaker that's held up by these cables somehow broke, right, and dropped onto the piano and caused all sorts of commotion. Unless we're Navy SEALs with nerves of steel, all of our bodies would be thrown into a state called fight, flight, or freeze. Most of you probably know this, okay? So what would happen? Our breathing would increase, our heart rate would increase, our muscles would tense up, and a few other things would happen. Our digestive system would actually stop or slow down. Our immune system would shut off. And fun fact, our nails and our hair would stop growing. So if you want to save money on haircuts, just be really stressed. And eventually you'll go bald. So all these things would happen in our bodies. We would react. And then what would happen? We would realize it's not a real threat. We're not in any danger. And we would take a sigh of relief. And then our bodies would go back into a state called homeostasis. Disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't have any children, but I have read about this. So the state called homeostasis, this is what we call the green zone when we're working with kids. Fight and flight, we call the red zone, and freeze, we call the blue zone. So the problem is, so this process of getting stressed and then calming down is actually healthy, and it's normal, and it helps us survive because it takes energy away from our non-essential functions and moves it to our essential functions, which is our heart and our lungs and our muscles. The problem is, for children like Lyra and other children in Ukraine, is this calming back down process isn't happening, and they're staying in this heightened state for weeks and months, and some of them for years. And what we see is the health of these children degrade rapidly. We've seen children lose sight. We've seen children losing patches of hair. They're getting sick more often. They're staying sick longer. And some of them have even died from it. There was one famous case that the New York Times did an article about. And this little girl who was 6 passed away in a cellar in Donetsk from the fear of being bombed constantly. So we wanted to find a way to help. We wanted to find a way to help children regulate back into that green zone from these red and blue zones. And this is what we came up with. With the help of a bunch of PhD psychologists, we came up with the NOVI Life Kit. This is essentially a backpack full of toys, and inside this backpack is an instruction book, and this instruction book has 300 activities in it that help the child calm back down to the green zone. Each of these activities is designed to help the child regulate, and how the child chooses the activity is through the dice. So first the child does a self-check. They determine, am I in the red zone, am I in the blue zone, or am I in the green zone? Then once they've decided, then they roll the dice. The first roll tells you what page to go to, and the second roll tells you which activity to do. So if I roll a 4 and then a 1, let's say, then it might suggest that I use the jump rope, and I jump 10 times on the left leg and 10 times on the right leg, okay? Or if I roll a 3 and a 2, then it might have me draw a picture of my favorite animal. Or if I roll a 6 and a 1, then it might have me play Twister. You guys know this game? We'll play this later, right? Okay, so, or it might have you blow bubbles. There's a million activities that you can do with these toys. And each of them is designed to regulate. They may seem simple, but when you jump rope, you're activating your core muscles and you're regulating your hormones that way. When you draw a picture, you're not thinking about the problems in the world and the stresses that you're under. It's a distraction. When you are playing Twister, you're not only activating your core muscle groups, but you're also being social, which is a huge part of trauma recovery. When you're blowing bubbles, what did I just do? I took a deep breath. And so there's all sorts of bubble games that help children, sorry, I gotta use the mic, that help children breathe and help children regulate their stress. And so with the help of our community, this kit has been distributed all over the country, and it's currently helping hundreds of children like Lyra manage their stress. So that's it for my third story. We started hearing about, what did we start hearing about? What was my first story about? Max, yeah, we started hearing about Max. Thank you. Somebody was listening. And we heard about how food and community building events are needed near the front lines and how heroes like Max are doing that. In the second story, we heard about Alex and how the technology shortage has led to children dropping out of school and how Chicago neighbors like Annie have helped bridge that gap. And in our third story, we hear about kids like Lyra who are dealing with extreme stress and how the NOVI Life Kit is meant to help them. I want to wrap up my section of the talk with Lyra's entry to the video portion of our contest. This is her answer to the question, why do you want peace in Ukraine? Thank you very much for listening.
Доброго дня, мене звати Валерія, я з міста Харкова. Мені 7 років. Я хочу миру, щоб всі дома були цілі, щоб всі люди були теж цілі. І наші захисники. Я хочу, щоб повернутися до бабусі та хрещеної. Слава Україні, героям слава!
Lyra, or Valeria. She's the same age as my daughter, Kristen. And we started with my soul-searching question, if you'll recall, as I'm running across the sandbar and hiding in a boat to go up to this camp. And that night, it's the only time that I've taken my family on a trip like this, we were shot at. And I asked the question, what is the value of this venture? Is this worth it? Is the risk that we're taking worth it? Is the risk that Jon takes to go to these frontline villages worth it? He didn't tell you, but while he was there, artillery is pounding all day and all night. The earth is shaking, not just from artillery, but short-range missiles, and then finally longer-range ballistic missiles. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Saying yes is exciting, but it's also dangerous. And this reminds me of C.S. Lewis and other heroes of faith who count the cost of what it means to follow Christ and do what they feel he has called them to do, and they end up in various forms of suffering or dead. And the call to say yes is a call upon all of us. I mean, the mission of Jesus in Luke chapter 4 is a pretty muscular mission, and really that's our mission. We're supposed to be proclaiming the year of our Lord's favor, setting captives free, bringing sight to blind eyes. We're supposed to be healers in the world who are on this unstoppable mission empowered by the love of God. And kids like Lyra, they can experience this love. And when I ask myself the question, is the work that my family and I did, now my kids are all out on their own now, but actually my youngest one's in Iraq with the Yazidi right now, so she's kind of following in our footsteps. But the way I chose to raise my family, or the way that I chose to live and deliberately expose myself to risk, when I look at Lyra and I compare her to Kristen, I think, what would I do for my daughter? What would you do for your daughter? There's really no limit to what Dave would do for his son and daughter. There's no limit to what Steve would do for his kids. Anyone here, all of you. I mean, I've seen Mama Fury before, when my wife thought that one of my daughters was in trouble, and it's a force to be reckoned with. Get out of the way of the angry woman. Okay, what I'm talking about is something we all understand, but tapping into that same visceral sense of calling, that same visceral sense of protection and love applies to every child everywhere. Valeria is part of us. There's never going to be another Valeria ever again. She's the one and only Valeria that has ever happened. And she's an important part of what God wants to say to the world. And just because she's one of the 7 million displaced children who live in a war zone in Ukraine, one of the 450 million worldwide who live in zones of active conflict and war, that doesn't mean that we give up on her or them. Valeria is important to all of us. Think that this is your daughter submitting this piece of artwork. She didn't send one, she sent 2. Isn't it cool that she recorded a video without her mom knowing? And she's all, I'm going to tell you how it is. Listen to me. Totally my daughter, Kristen. So she sent in 2. She was only supposed to send in 1. 7-year-old Valeria. And she said, I'm sending in 2 because the top one is before the war, where bombs and missiles rained down on my house. And the second one is my home, where my mother and father and grandparents and family live in peace. I want peace in the world. I don't want people dead. Imagine if your daughter said that. How empowering would that be? What would you do? And then anytime you say yes, because I know everyone in this room has done this, and you fail, or you end up getting ripped off or hurt, or the venture doesn't succeed, and you come out looking like a fool, what does that do? Is that why we stop saying yes? Is that force big enough to keep us from saying yes next time? And then we see on the news this relentless barrage of suffering and pain and misery in the world. A whole nother war just broke out with our only friends in the Middle East, our only really, well, the Kurds and the Jews. It's the 33rd armed conflict in the world today. Before Israel and Hamas, it was 32. We see all this on the news, and what does it do? It overwhelms us, right? And I find myself feeling overwhelmed and thinking, I can't take another war. I can't take another story of thousands of children suffering because of these adult conflicts. I can't take it. And the temptation I have is to retire to a golf course and drink lots of beer every day and forget about it. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. Do you guys ever feel this way? I think we all feel this way. And then because it's overwhelming, we are not really able, we're not even open to saying yes again. It's like the switch gets shut off. It's too much, right? Or then you try something and your family says, "Are you crazy? Are you stupid? Why would you do that? That's dangerous. How can you think of doing something like that? What about your children? What about my grandson? How can you take my grandson into the inner city and do this ministry that you're doing with disadvantaged children?" Society? What, you're going to do something different than the rest of us? You're going to say yes to something that's not within the orthodox beaten path? And you've got some harebrained idea that you're going to matter? Look at you. You don't have the education. You don't know what you're talking about. You barely understand the politics of your own country. And you're going to go get involved in Palestine and Israel? Raise your hand if you've heard this before. Everyone has heard this before. Everyone has heard it, and it's one of the reasons that we're just crushed into a place where we can't say yes again. But that's not our place. And we were promised by all of the disciples that this is going to happen. When you say yes, stuff's going to happen. And it's going to hurt, and you're going to suffer, and it's going to be painful. But you will be observing your own courage in action. You'll be observing yourself saying, "Yes, I don't accept the dirty, rotten system. I'm going to do something about this." You'll feel that thrill like Bilbo Baggins, who talked about in his dream, in his mind, exchanging his walking stick for a sword, and feeling the wind on his face in the tall mountains and following Gandalf on an adventure to defeat Smaug the Horrible from destroying the world and stealing the world's wealth. That's you and me. And so the story of yes, the story of Valeria, the story of Rose and that first little girl, the only known survivor from her village, the story of my life and my wife and my friends and so many of you, look back on these times when you've said yes, and they are the best times of our lives. They're the times when we feel fully alive, even though they hurt. And they're the times we learn the most about what it means to be, to embody this awesome force of love that we are here together and have in common to celebrate. This love of God. It is unstoppable. And I don't believe that God keeps track of our no's. I believe he's incredibly empathetic to the reasons we say no and understanding. I believe that he's constantly just waiting and saying, "Hey, you're going to make it, man. We're in this together. It's okay. Be nice to yourself." And you know what? Say yes. That's what he's constantly saying. Say yes. These NOVI life kits have a stress ball. This is my favorite part of the life kit. This is perhaps as significant as the missile fragment you just passed around. Make sure and squish it once. Again, it's a distraction from the feeling of trauma. It's a way to refocus concentration away from pain. And all of the activities in this kit are designed that way, like Jon said. These kits cost us $50 each. We have distributed 1,000 of them so far this year. It took us we've distributed 1,000 of them. And now we have the supplies for 1,500 more partial supplies, but we can't afford the rest of those supplies. We have trained, this year we've affected the lives of 28,000 people in Ukraine. And that's, I don't know what you want to call that. It feels a little braggy, but I'm blown away by that. We look through our reports, and the psychologists and the teachers and the church workers and the frontline social workers like Max that we've trained. And we look at the impact that they've made as they've reported to us. 28,000 people, you guys. We're 4 people. Our little new team is 4 people. And the impact that we're making in the life of someone like Valeria is beautiful. It's spectacular. You can watch it happen. And the adults, when they understand what the children are going through, when they understand why they're shut down, most of the kids on the front line are shut down. They're not hyper-reactive, they're hypo-reactive. They're frozen. And then Jon pulls out the life kit, or one of our other 3 tools, and starts interacting with the kids. And within a half an hour, even with explosions going off in the surrounding area, these kids just come to life. And the parents see it. They say to us, don't they? For the first time in months, I watch my child laugh. We are going to take this with us. When the air siren screams, we're taking this to the bomb shelter or the cellar. When my child is upset, I understand now they're not misbehaving. They don't need to be disciplined in that moment. They need help. They need to be distracted from the violence that they are party to. So we have these life kits, and my hope today, when we came to Chicago, my hope was that we could fully fund 500 more kits to distribute in October and November. I invite all of you to buy a NOVI life kit. They cost $50. There's a clear box on the table out there, and I'm like Rose. Remember Rose in the beginning of my talk? And the little girl that was the only known survivor from her village? Back then, I had this weird idea that helping people with material goods was social gospel. I came from a church movement that believed that, and that you can't help people like that. That's wrong, because it kind of confuses a pure decision to follow Jesus. It's total rubbish. How does Jesus interact with people? How does he interact with their needs? How does he talk to them even? And so I kind of got off on a tangent there. But these life kits are a deal changer. They're one of the tools that the psychologists trained us to do, and now we're trying to take them to all 7 million kids in Ukraine who are living under these missiles, artillery, and the chaos and violence of war. I would love it if each of you would buy one of those, or 2, or 10, or 100. And the point was that the church has been very gracious and is also supporting this work. There's a clear box on our table out there. Buy the other pieces of art from the art competition. Actually, there's only 11 out of about 50 or 60 that we had. But you can see those, and there's a brochure where you can read what the children meant to say through their pictures. Yeah, that's the brochure. That's right. If you join us and buy a life kit, or actually whatever you do, if you say a prayer for us, we'd like to give you one of these. It's a sunflower, which is also a symbol for Ukraine. I actually thought it was sunflowers and blue sky, because you can drive for hours in Ukraine, and it's forever sunflower fields. You remember that? It's the biggest exporter of sunflower products in the world. I didn't know that before I went there. But anyhow, this sunflower to us represents a child, a beautiful thing that blooms and makes the world a beautiful place. And we met a woman who does crafts, and we paid her roughly $1 each to fold and glue these. And she did these all by hand, and there's a string, and you just pull off the sunflower, and then you have a handmade ornament for your tree to remember to pray and remember about what you've heard tonight. And her story is written on the back of the card. So please take one of those. They're on the table out there by the clear box. They're made of newspaper from Kyiv, and our idea there was turning bad news into good news. And that's what we're about, right? That's what we do, right? I have these small brochures that my wife made. She's our Graphic Arts and Communications International Headquarters Department. And she made these, and we had them made the night before I got on the airplane to come here. So I really hope you'll take one and make my wife feel valuable. And on the back is our contact details, a barcode that'll take you to our website address. And I actually hope that you'll use that barcode here or on the brochure and sign up to hear from us. If we establish a relationship with you, we can help you understand what's happening and how we can constructively engage, how we can do something for these kids. So what I'd like to do is make sure you understand that joining NOVI and giving $50 for a life kit, that may be what you do to say yes. That may be one thing that you can constructively do tonight. I hope you will. But whether you do or not, what I really hope for in the big picture, because we're all a part of this family and we're all a part of a community, is that we all say yes to whatever that still small voice is indicating. To have eyes wide open, open hearts, open minds, to go into life, into our jobs, into the workplace, into our homes, whatever, and have this openness to, yes, Lord, as you call, I will go. Now, I think that we still have some moments for Q&A.
Let's thank them first, or again. Thank you both. We're going to have about 20 or so minutes for question and answer, and we're going to ask if you have a question to come up and speak into the microphone so everyone can hear, and they will answer to the best of their ability. We also have the community dinner starting at about 5:30. Everyone is invited. If you are able to stay for the dinner, when we finish with the Q&A section, we're going to ask that you exit the sanctuary and go to your right and go directly to Fellowship Hall for the dinner. If you are not able to stay for the dinner, when you exit, if you would go to your left, John and Steve will be at the display area and would love to greet you on your way out. The clear box is there if you want to drop in a donation. There's also a drop-down menu if you want to go to our church website. We have the same things available down in Fellowship Hall. And then they will join us for the dinner, and I think they're going to bring the backpack contents with them downstairs so we can get a closer-up look at all the items in this remarkable life kit. So please stay for Q&A, and then stay for dinner if you can, or just make sure you take time to greet them on your way out. And if you have a question, please come forward. If you can't, raise your hand, and I will bring the microphone to you.
And if you come up, then you can have a piece of candy. I have some Ukrainian candy here.
He jumped in his seat.
Oh.
I do have a question. The jar that we, I think I have quite a big voice.
Oh,
Yeah, for the live stream.
I do have a question, and it is about the children that we saw toward the beginning of your presentation, where we saw the bubbles, et cetera, et cetera. Were those children parentless or not? I wondered that at the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that particular camp happened outside of Kherson, and those children all had guardians. That doesn't necessarily mean they had parents, and very few children in those villages have fathers present.
Yes.
They're usually raised by their grandmothers. And a lot of times what happens is the mother is in the city sending money or
Yes.
trying to support somehow, and then the child and the grandmother are in the village.
I see.
It just depends on the situation, but those particular children did have some sort of guardian. If a child doesn't have a guardian, then they go to an institution in Ukraine,
I see.
and they're cared for by the government.
Thank you.
There's
Yeah,
over
thank you for the
100,000 of them, too.
Yeah, there's 100,000 children. There were 100,000 children before the war who did not have parents or guardians, and now the number is much, much higher. We don't know what that number is. So that's another side of it.
John, you mentioned early in your presentation that you guys got involved because the larger organizations would not. Why not?
Well, you asked me, so I'll answer it. So it's a great question. The larger organizations are involved. I didn't mean to miscommunicate, and they are helping, and they do serve an important role. What I mean to say is in these villages where it's extremely dangerous, the insurance and the politics and all of the complexities involved with foreign aid don't allow them to get aid to these frontline villages. And that's where CBOs, which is community-based organizations, or organizations like us, come in to fill that gap. And that's why what we do is really important. Thank you.
Large organizations have the reach they do because of government funds, foreign aid, and those funds come with the same diplomatic realities as the country has in their diplomatic relationship with that war or that conflict or that country. So the agencies can only do what the funder, in this case EU or America or Sweden or whatever, they can only do what they say they can do. And it never includes helping in an active conflict area because that is a breach of liability protocol. So it's not that they don't want to be there, it's just the nature of how they're organized. When the people get out of active conflict, they'll get help at massive scale that we could never do. But for the people who are in the front lines, it's small organizations like us that you'll meet. And in the case of Ukraine, I don't think we've ever met another organization on our trips in the front.
No.
No. Except for very brave and motivated Ukrainians. We could tell Ukrainian hero stories all day long.
All day long.
Yeah.
These are really unbelievable people, and they have networks set up to get food to all of these villages. It's an extremely large network of really brave people.
One other thing I know you guys would like to hear, now that I think of it, is in all of these frontline villages, the only community that's left and the community center that makes it happen is the church.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing left. It's all blown up. There's a pastor who refused to leave. He sent his family away because he can, and he's got denominational support, and he can send them away. But the pastor stays, gets in his van once a week or once a month, drives to Zaporizhia through the lunar landscape, road in order to get food at a warehouse that we support, and then they drive food back to these villages. The church is the only community left in these frontline villages, as far as we can see. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's really different than the Middle East. Like, I've worked a lot in Iraq and Syria. It's not like that at all. So Ukraine has its own special, brilliant things coming out under this terrible pressure.
It's very startling knowing that those are the frontline areas and the people who can't get out. I think sometimes in the media it seems like it's the sick and the elderly, which I know is also true. So it's very startling to see children. They also can't leave. And that you would see that so much on the front line. Active conflict, there are children there in almost every place in the front. Is that true?
It's absolutely shocking. I can't even describe to you what it feels like to be playing Duck, Duck, Goose with 4, 5, and 6-year-olds while artillery is blowing up. Within, I mean, you can hear boom, 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 and we're just playing Duck, Duck, Goose. It's absolutely indescribable that these children are subjected to this. And a lot of times the reason they can't leave is because of a stubborn guardian who isn't willing to evacuate, or more likely, it's a family who can't afford to leave, and they would be absolutely destitute. And so they figure, better to die here where we grew up.
Even if we offer to get them out ourselves, it's a short-term solution that they don't see a long-term way to sustain. They don't want to leave. They don't trust that they'll get the support they need from the government or an agency. And so
in many cases, they don't. An IDP within Ukraine gets paid $35 a month per person. That's their lifeline that they can live on, which is completely unsustainable. So yeah, it's heartbreaking.
And would you say again what IDP means?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, IDP is internally displaced person. Refugee is somebody who's fled their home and left the country. An IDP is still within their country, but they've fled their home.
I know.
It's fun, right?
I have 3 on my coffee table at home.
There's some fun Ukrainian words. That's anti-stress. And that game is twister.
Are there by chance any Ukrainian teachers who remain behind and stay with the children that you work in conjunction with?
Can you repeat yourself, please?
Are there any Ukrainian teachers who remain behind with the kids and that you've worked in conjunction with?
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of them. Yeah. There's many teachers who've stayed in Ukraine, and we've worked with a lot of them. That's a huge network that we work through, and that's a lot of how this gets distributed is through teachers and psychologists.
The teachers are the ones really desperate for these kids because they see a solution to kids acting out in their educational setting. You can't really it's mostly done not in schools, but the teachers want these kids in order to help their kids regulate and be able to kind of control the volume and the intensity of the day when there's school.
So the front line is long.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there's informal networks of Ukrainians that are getting things around the country. And I was just curious if that is part of your method for identifying enclaves of children, places where children are that need your help.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how we find the children, is through those networks of pastors, because they know which villages have children and which villages don't. Because some of the villages don't have children, and some of them have lots. And so it's that network that tells us where our aid is going to be most effective. But when you say the front line is long, that was one of the things that was most shocking to me when I went there. It's almost as long as the entire coast of California. So,
and the front line is a series of trenches, just like World War II. So they've dug these massive, hundreds of miles long trenches on both sides of the disputed area, and there's constant artillery, constant fighting between the Russians in one side of the trench and the Ukrainians in the other side of the trench.
Jon.
hi, Donald.
We love you.
Love you too.
We pray for you.
Thank you.
And the reason I'm addressing you is because you're the most recent volunteer in NOVI. Steve, would you be willing to share in a safe way what the effect was on you doing such dangerous work for the Lord?
This gentleman I've known since, I guess, the end of the 90s, back in the 90s. He met me in a pharmacy, and I was buying baby delivery kits for one of our medics who was delivering babies. And our medic had just helped a woman give birth in a hollowed out tree during conflict. And every time I see Donald, he reminds me that that was our first meeting in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I have gone through all kinds of ways of coping with the stories of the people that we work with. And now with children, I find myself still, when I'm there, feeling the same kinds of emotions that I have to find a healthy way to manage and cope with. I haven't always coped well, and I haven't always even managed to cope at all in two separate occasions when people died. But now what I find is a lot more, a lot more emotional stability. I've done a lot of work on myself. Part of what's hard about coping is my own story of childhood. I had a tough childhood myself. And working through that and realizing that part of why I'm here and part of why I work with these kids has to do with my story. And I wasn't aware of that until, 5 or 10 years ago. So part of how I cope is that this is an honor to be able to do this work. These are beautiful children that deserve my attention and time. This is a part of what it means to follow Jesus. This is how I have found to do that. And for those that we reach, 28,000 this year, we've made a significant difference in their lives that would otherwise not have been made. And I feel satisfied that I'm doing what I can do, and that I'll keep pushing to do what I can do. So that's, I hope that answers my question, Donald.
How long does it take, like, if you want to adopt a child before they come to the United States?
Do you know?
I know it's mostly not possible.
Yeah, it's really tough. Adoption processes are really clogged up right now.
And also the system in Ukraine is pretty well broken. So there's many organizations working to reform the orphan care to state institution like it was in Romania under Ceausescu, and it's a broken system. We have interacted with that system on a number of occasions, and it really is terrible and heartbreaking, and as much as we're able to, we will continue to support and lean into that challenge to help those kids. But adopting a kid from Ukraine right now, I don't even think it's possible at all. There's no agency that's authorized to do it.
I don't think it is.
Maybe it's my mental problem, but I don't understand about these kits. $50 kits, are they what go to the kids, or, okay, fine. Now,
Yeah.
Can we write a check to what, NOVI, and give it to you? Is that it?
Sure.
Okay.
There's a box on our table where that check can get dropped into.
Okay,
Thank you for that question.
Okay, but that is another great question that I'd like to give a better answer to. The kits are entirely made in Ukraine. We have a factory that sews these in this western city of Rivne, just south of Belarus. This backpack costs right now $13 to make. We know we can get it cheaper in China, but we also know that this is giving jobs to Ukrainians and keeping their economy moving, and they're very proud of being a part of this. So the backpack itself is, if you look at it, we'll bring it down to dinner and we'll have it with us. It's waterproof and it's very well made. It's one that they can use for a long, long time, and the kids are very proud of it. So the backpack is one thing. We have the cards, the different impulse cards that belong with this kit. They're printed in Ukraine, and we pay a print shop for that. These are sewn by another sewing outfit, these twister things, which, laughter awaits when we start playing this.
And the twister mat is also a blanket that the kids can use when it gets cold.
That's why it's felt.
And so the idea is that each child receives one kit.
And actually, the price is changing all the time because the cost of goods is changing all the time. Right now, it's actually $54 a kit is what we're paying. But we round it off to 50 because it's an easy number. But just so you know, all of that comes from Ukraine.
First of all, thank you both for all the wonderful work that you're doing and for coming here to share it with us. Secondly, I'm curious what your goals or mission is for NOVI going forward. Will you expect to remain in Ukraine? Do you expect to grow into other regions and other conflict areas?
Well, you sound like a board member prospect. It depends on who of the four of us you ask what our big, hairy goal is. Mine is I want to reach all 450 million children in the world who are living in conflict zones. That's what I want to do. My wife says, now don't get carried away, boy, and let's just see what we can do. But there are 1 in 6 children today, 1 in 6 children alive today are living in a conflict zone. And we can reach them. We have proven that. They are reachable, even in a country like Yemen. And so I feel compelled to do everything I can, and I hope that our team, our resources, and capacity grows into that big, hairy goal. Right now, we're focused on Ukraine. And we've made a commitment to one another to not take a new country or conflict on until we're sustainable in Ukraine. And that requires money and manpower. And we're moving in that direction. I think within the next 12 months, we'll be able to look at one of the other conflicts. Yes, ma'am?
Have you said how big your team is?
Yeah.
The question is how big your team is.
Yeah. Well, we're 5.
It's a difficult question because we work with a lot of Ukrainians in country, but NOVI itself is 5.
We have 5. We have 1 full-time director in Kyiv, and then we have 1 part-time worker in Norway, because we're a foundation in Norway, which is where my wife is from. And then we have a part-time person here in the States who does our administration here in the wonderful armpit of Midland, Texas. Ooh, is this streaming?
We'll cut that part.
So sorry. I'm going to pay for that.
Yeah, you really will.
And then there's my wife and Jon and I working full-time to do this work. And then we have 2 psychologists that we pay on a contract basis to mentor us and develop these tools that we're using.
But our community stateside that supports us and our community Ukraine side that helps get these tools to the kids that need them, we count them all as the NOVI community. So even though only 5 of us are on payroll, it's a much larger network of people that it takes to get this kind of thing done.
That's why we chose the name, the NOVI community. Have any of you been in an organization where you're not a community? Had a job where you're not a community? It's really horrible, right?
Not a fun time.
And we want to build something that is connected, interdependent, synergistic. We want to build a community. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you again for this
Thanks,
presentation, for answering all of our questions. Do you have a question?
And I just want to say thank you so much to Laura and First Pres, Pastor Laura, for hosting us. We are so thankful that you guys came here tonight. Can we have a quick round of applause for everybody who made this happen?
We do invite you, if you can stay for the dinner, please do. They will come and be with us for dinner, and they're going to bring the backpack down. So if you are staying for dinner, exit the sanctuary and go to your right, and there is a way to give donations downstairs as well. If you can't stay, when you exit, if you would go to your left, you can have some time to greet them and get the sunflowers, which we will also have downstairs. And just to make sure everyone knows, if you would like to donate cash or check to NOVI, check to the church, will all go to them. We are making sure that it goes along the proper channels. And you can also go to the church website, and then NOVI will be a drop-down choice. So lots of options, and I know everything is appreciated.
Yeah, and we've asked for your contact details so that we can invite you to stay in touch with us. So even if your check goes to the church, we'll still be in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I guess we should go out to the table?
Go to the table.
Okay, I'll see you at the table.